I'm Matt Boothby. I'm the Vice President of Information Technology for the Indianapolis Colts. Indianapolis Colts are a football club competing in the National Football League. We're focused on hosting large events that provide a great experience for our fans and winning football games. Our fans and partners trust us with their data so that we can provide services and facilitate business. We also maintain a lot of information about our strategies and plans for our football team, and all those aspects, security is a primary concern. We're involved in all technology in our environment, so any solution that aligns with the way we already work and allow us to focus on the technical solutions that we choose to use and spend less time and focus on other threats is a big benefit. Most of our staff and team work in many environments all the time. It's not so much working just from home or at work. They'll be working here in the complex, out on the practice field, at training camp. We work a lot out of hotels. We're playing games all across the country and increasingly all around the world. Having ThreatLocker protecting our endpoints gives us a lot of confidence in our ability to operate in any of those environments. ThreatLocker as a solution helps us focus on the solutions that we do put in place and less on other threats in our environment. There are a lot of compliance and frameworks that we have to align with. I think the most significant being PCI. So our fans trust us with their personal information and their credit cards. We take that's an utmost concern for us. ThreatLocker really helps us in that regard. What I'm most impressed with so far with ThreatLocker is, with us taking an allow listing kind of approach, that being able to be implemented and go unnoticed from our user standpoint, we're able to allow the solutions that we've explicitly chosen to operate in our environment. Our users can work and focus on their day and not have the false positives and not have the disruption that I feared being associated with a whitelisting kind of approach, but it's been really smooth, really unnoticed. From a protection standpoint, we feel really good in that regard.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on how to implement an allow listing solution and why it is so important. Today, we're joined by Jerome, who's one of our solution engineers. Welcome, Jerome.
Hi, everybody.
We're going to go through a demo.
Sure.
I think our goal is really simple. We want people to understand the value of allow listing because I think as a security professional, it's one of the most important things you can do. And ThreatLocker has, 7 or 8 solutions in our suite now.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's so many solutions out there that we, support, but at the same time, there's really so much that's happening. So what we're really trying to, kind of show everybody here today is, how to easily implement this solution, right?
Yeah, and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's the concept. On basic, the idea of allow listing is very simple. You decide what executable scripts,
Yep,
DLLs, are allowed to run on your machine, and you block everything else.
absolutely.
And when we started ThreatLocker, if we go back to 2017, and I think about what we set ThreatLocker's mission as, which was to change, it wasn't explicitly allow listing, but it was to change the mission from default allow to default deny. And when we said this in 2017, we were kind of laughed at. People said, this is a dumb idea. No one's ever going to implement this. It's going to be incredibly difficult. And they weren't wrong. I mean, the idea of how many files are on the average computer, 20,000,
Oh,
30,000?
yeah, at least, yeah.
At least. So you start thinking about, well, I have to allow every DLL and every
Right, right.
script file, and then Windows updates, and then this changes. But the concept is simple. We say, this is what's allowed to run. Everything else is blocked. And doesn't matter if it's ransomware, doesn't matter if it's TeamViewer, doesn't matter if someone's trying to get you to download a game or it's
Right.
just bad software, it's not going to be allowed to run. In practice, it was always difficult. So what we've done is really going to think about how do we do this automatically, easily, track updates, not worry about things being blocked, and really create a seamless allow listing solution. And I think the first thing is, how do we figure out what's out there in the first place? So maybe you can switch over to your screen and show us how we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll show my screen here, and truth of the matter is this it's actually all of the work that gets done with regards to kind of figuring out the environment is so incredibly easy now with just the way that ThreatLocker does it. Well, first and foremost, right, we need to get an agent on the machine. So we make that super easy, right? We have an MSI if you're using SCCM or something like that, so we can get that sent out over to you. But the nice part is really that beginning piece, right? How do I get started in this in the first place? So once we get the agent actually on the device itself, it lands in what's called a learning state, right? And this is a very key and important piece of the puzzle, right? Because we first do a initial scan of the environment, learning all of the key files, right, that need to be allowed, and once we learn those particular key files, we turn on automatically all of the built-ins, and keep in mind, right, why that is important. What are built-ins in the first place?
So our goal is initially we want to know what's in your
Right,
environment because there's no such thing as good or bad software. All
right,
software could be good and all software could be bad. And if you've got a coupon clip in your environment that's made in China and can see your
sure,
passwords, and you say, "Well, I really need these discounts," then you decide that's good or bad. So what our goal is to figure out how is your environment as it comes, and we do that in two ways. When we scan your machine, the
right,
first scan we look for what we consider known applications, and this is the built-in,
right,
which is an application that we as essentially as a company update and maintain that list of. So an application is essentially a list of files, hashes,
right,
shards. So we'll go in and we'll say, okay, Putty or Office needs a list of all these files. That's a built-in.
right.
And if that application updates tomorrow, we have someone here 24 hours a day that normally gets the updates before they're released, will update those files into the list. So you don't have to worry about it being blocked. But our first pass is what do we know what's in your environment?
Correct.
And then we create those policies. And maybe if you can show us what they look like, those
Yeah, and
policies.
and what's crazy, right, is the amount of built-ins that we actually support today. So, on a day-to-day basis, our application team is constantly cataloging these applications, and from a built-in perspective, we got well over 8,000 of those built-in applications. But that being the case, when we learn the actual built-in that, of course, if it exists in the environment today, ThreatLocker will automatically turn on a policy. It could be, it typically gets done on the machine level, right? So if it sees an application that exists on a particular machine, right? Here's Microsoft Office. I had Advanced IP Scanner on my computer. I had Notepad++. It basically automatically creates these policies for me, and so I don't have to, sit there and you know do go into my CMDB database and figure out every single application, which is often not up to date anyway. So it automatically figures all of this out for me, and then of course takes care of making sure that these things are allowed.
So the built-ins, what? How many do we have?
Well over 8,000 now.
Yeah.
On average, I think we're adding 100 or 200 or so every month nowadays. Because again, it's just constantly growing, and we're really just kind of making sure that we've accounted for all of the most common applications out there.
And this takes away 90% of the work for when you're thinking about a management point,
Yeah.
because what you're saying is we're going to learn all the applications, we're going to match them to built-ins. That's going to allow us to give you lots of information about those files. It's
Yep.
going to be able to validate they. Now we're not saying they're good or bad, because I noticed you had Advanced IP Scanner,
Right. Right.
first tool we see on every single breach. So
Yep.
either that or Angry IP. So we're saying here's a list of programs you're running. We're going to make sure that list continues to run, and you can review it and you can filter by category. So maybe we
Sure.
can show, so we can look for things like remote access tools or IP scanners.
Absolutely. No, so we're going to be able to see, basically all the different types of applications that we have, and we can categorize fairly easily based on, the type of application that we have. So, essentially bringing up the category list here, right? If I wanted to take a look at, AI type of software or something like that, and of course, in this case, scanning tool is what I would expect for advanced IP scanner or something like that. Do you remember the category for that,
Network
Danny?
tools, maybe.
Network tools,
That's a
maybe? Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
network software, right? Perhaps something like that. So I'll do a quick search there, right? And it sees that, of course, I have advanced IP scanner showing up on my list.
Now, this is interesting because we're looking for known applications, but somewhere on your system we found an unknown version of Advanced IP Scanner. So this
Correct.
goes to the second point of this. We don't know everything you're running. We can't track every piece of
Correct.
software in the world. And there's going to be software in your environment that we don't know. So the second pass after we look at these key files is we look at what about the unknown stuff, and we also catalog that. And we've built this really advanced. I'd say algorithm to determine what is the name of that application.
Yeah.
And we're not just looking at the add remove programs folder or add remove programs in Windows. We're looking at if something is in your documents folder, if something's
Right.
in your program files called custom app 123. We're going to learn that, catalog the dependencies, and create the app. But of course, we're not saying we know what it is now. We're saying, hey, we found an app called custom app 123.
Right.
We don't know what that is. So how long does learning normally take?
It depends on the person, but quite honestly, a simple person, an average person probably uses 15 to 20 applications on a day-to-day basis, right? So for those types of people, it doesn't take very long. I think within the span of a day, we can actually figure out everything that is needed for that particular person. Now, for somebody that might be a developer that's creating a lot of their own DLLs and they're creating a lot of their own software, we typically recommend to keep it in learning a little bit longer. The average that we have it set up in ThreatLocker is to be in learning for 21 days. But more often than not, you don't need all 21 days to learn what everybody is doing.
Yeah, and we used to actually have it set so by default it would be indefinite, and you'd go
Absolutely,
in and
yeah.
secure them. The reason we changed that was we had so many customers hit by ransomware attacks, and you could see that this would be denied.
Yeah, they get afraid to put it in the secure, and then of course our job here, as a solutions engineer, right? I try everything I can to convince you, like everything looks good. When you put this in the secure state, we're not going to block anything. So,
Well,
you know,
let's talk about that. So
yeah,
we deployed, we've
yeah,
learned,
yep,
we've got the list of applications that you're running. Inevitably, on every call, every time we do deployment, the customer curses a little bit and says, "Why is this on my machine?"
right, right,
And sometimes we have to talk you off the ledge because
yeah,
you've got two goals when you implement this. The first one is to make sure nothing worse happens in your environment. So you've got your list of applications. Maybe we can bring that up, and we've got. So this is saying this is what's happening. The second goal is to kind of undo some of the damage that's already been done to your environment. So when you deploy ThreatLocker first, inevitably you're going to see some games, you're going to see some coupon clippers that are made in China that can see your passwords, and we'll show you. Have you actually got like a Cooper policy or anything on here?
I don't in my environment here, but certainly can I can bring up a policy or an
Yeah,
application
let's
very
create a new
easily.
policy for a
Yeah,
Cooper just so we can show what that details is, because we'll also show you what the extension has access to. So if we go into Cooper,
oh, so that there, Coopert. Right. So
and this
here's
very popular, seen on probably half of the deployments I'd see this on.
Yep. So I
And
will call it that, right? It's a Chrome extension for Coopert, right? And then I'll create that policy. I'll put it at maybe at the group level here on my workstation side. So that's all set, ready to go there. I'll deploy that policy, and you'll see that that policy shows up in my workstations group, allowing this particular application to
now,
run.
if you go back to the applications on that and search for Cooper there,
Sure.
now you can do filters on this as well. So if you just search for Cooper there, we can show you. You can also filter by country, but one of the things you'll see about this is that it's actually made in China. Now, our research team actually don't tell you just where it's made, but they'll tell you what it has access to. So you'll notice this has access to all of your browsing data. It has access to the internet, and it has access to also every password you enter on every single website. Now, we're not saying that Cooper is a bad company. The Chinese would never steal your data. So, but I think it allows you to start making good decisions with good data.
Sure.
And of course, American companies can be compromised too. European companies can be compromised. But when you're saying what is the business value of having a coupon clipper versus what is the risk of this program could potentially see my data or can see my data, but could potentially do something bad, you start being able to quantify those decisions with data. Now,
Right.
to the point we have to talk people off the ledge is typically when you first deploy, you're going to see a whole load of stuff you don't like. Now, you're going to change the way your business works. So, going forward, if a user wants a new piece of software, they're going to request it. We're going to show you what that looks like. And they're not going to be happy about that request. The worst thing we want you to do is to remove everything on day one. So you have your
Right.
users upset on day one. What we want to do is get it working as your environment is and then slowly start pulling things back. The highest risk, of course, if you've
Sure.
got TeamViewer running and you shouldn't be running TeamViewer, pull that off your machine.
Sure. Sure.
But pick your battles on day one.
Hmm.
So then we've learned we want to make sure nothing's going to get broken. So most users, it scans the hard drive, it monitors everything that's happening in temporary folders for the next week. We
Yep.
go in and everything's perfect. And it's very easy to lock down. How do we do that simulation to make sure everything's perfect?
Yeah. So, well, a couple of things that we can do before we even lock it down in the first place, right? We can head over to the Unified Audit. So it's a tool within ThreatLocker. And very easily, what we can do is it's just a single click of a button, simulated denies, right? So I can look over a period, and we call it a look back period. So you'll hear us say that quite a bit when you're working with your engineer. The look back period allows you to basically look back for over a period. Now I haven't installed anything on this computer anytime recently, but let me see if I can go back because it hasn't been on much. But essentially, we can see basically everything that's happening within the environment. Essentially, you know anything that is running on this computer. Read, write, move, delete. Executions is what we're really talking about in this scenario, right? So if I wanted to see anything that would have executed on this computer, ThreatLocker will give me that.
So I noticed you got a couple of red denies here.
Yep, yep,
So these aren't simulated denies. This you're actually in secured mode at this point.
that is correct.
So if you were in learning mode, putty, obviously you see that you tried to run putty there. It shows it was denied because you're secured and putty was denied.
Yep,
If you were looking back in the simulation period, it would show denied but in green,
that is correct.
and you
So,
don't get a checkbox instead of the.
yeah, that's a good point. So, this I always go through this with my customers, right? So, and of course, the effective action in this scenario was to deny it. So it's a red deny. However, if we were in a learning state, it will tell you what did it hit, and it would have hit the default deny if there's no matching policy. And so, therefore, as an action to hitting that default deny, it basically will have a policy action of deny with the option to request, but the effective action was to permit it, thereby learning that particular application.
And so when you first deploy this, everything shows as deny for a couple of hours, and
Sure.
then within a few hours, that number of denies goes down and down and down and
Yep. Yep.
down, and we're learning. Now, if you're a developer, or maybe you have a piece of software that's doing something crazy that's
Yep.
changing its DLL every day, we're going to spot this in that look back, and we're going to make sure we put an exception in place. So we could add an exception for the path and process or
Correct.
certificate or something like that to make sure it's allowed. So we've done this look back. What do we do to secure it?
So when we're feeling pretty good, what I usually do is I head over to devices first and I take a look at this value, this deny count. This gives me that indicator of like, okay, 7 days, and particularly when you first start, right? This number is going to be inflated because ThreatLocker doesn't know anything yet, right? So as the days go by, 3 days, 1 day in, all of a sudden you see that number being significantly smaller. And then that to me is an indicator of like, yep, this machine is ready to get locked down. So it's pretty much a simple click. If I had 100 or 1,000 computers, it's very much a simple hit that, and then of course
There's,
set it into a secured state, or
there's
I can
also
do
an
it.
indicator on there. So do you mind switching to mode for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we could also do the same thing. So now obviously this has, if we switch to learning mode,
Yep.
now I don't know if it'll actually, it won't tell you it's ready to secure now because you've only just switched into it,
Yep.
but you'll notice there's an in progress there. So when you first deploy, this will actually go to ready secure for you, and that will do all those counts for you. It'll check that the machine's been switched on for 7
Yep.
days. It will check that it hasn't had any denies in 7 days, and it will say ready to secure. Now this one's already been secured, so it's not going to
Absolutely.
trip. If you hover over the eye there, it'll tell you that you haven't been in learning for 7 days or something. I'm guessing. I think you have to click on
Let
it.
me click on the
So
details.
here it says the machine has no files that wouldn't have been blocked in the learning period because it was the learning mode over 7 days ago. So
Yep.
it can't say it's ready to secure. So this is a nice little indicator as well of which machines you get a lot of easy wins.
Oh, absolutely. And more importantly, right? It tells you right out of the gate. Okay, you know, are we letting everything through? Right. That's really the key because the last thing we want is to flip this thing into secure and all of a sudden, everything blows up and everybody's complaining that all their stuff is getting blocked. So this gives you an indicator that okay, it's been on for at least 4 days or so. We know what the counts are, and those numbers have gone down, so we know what the behavior has been for over the last several days.
Okay, so you've deployed, you've waited, you slept for a week, you jumped on a call with
Hmm.
you, you've done a simulation,
Yep.
everything looks good. Now switch into secure mode,
I would flip it into secure. Yep.
and then within 60 seconds or so, you you
Yeah.
can't run any new software.
Absolutely, yeah. So then what's the end user experience, right? And that's kind of a big deal for me, right? It, I figured everything out and everything is looking good, but as soon as tomorrow or the next day or maybe 6 weeks later, right? Somebody is going to want to run something, or perhaps maybe some update may have kind of come up.
That
Um,
wasn't a built-in or
that
wasn't
wasn't a
already
built-in,
dealt
and
with
and
during the
and yeah,
simulation.
exactly, something brand new. So let's pretend for the sake of argument, right? I went ahead and downloaded something. Doesn't really matter what it is. I have TeamViewer in here. I already have Notepad++ and Putty in here, but let's go with TeamViewer as an example. So if I tried it to run TeamViewer as an example here, right? ThreatLocker will block it. and it will give them the pop-up letting them know that, of course, this is getting blocked because we don't have a policy for it.
Now, it's not just the user trying to run something. If someone got into your RMM, or you had a
Hmm.
vulnerability like a tunnel blue and tried to push it out, or they got into SCCM or Active Directory, it's going to block as well. It's the same principle. It doesn't matter where it comes from, it's not going to be able to run there.
Yep. So, and the nice thing about this, right, is when I go to basically take a look and approve this, the problem I always have is I can call whatever application whatever I want to make people think that I'm actually looking at TeamViewer. So how do I verify this is what it says that it is, right? Um, our research team spends a ton of time trying to figure out, right? Based on its hash, right? This has access to your files, can access the internet, registry and applications. But at the same time, they try to give you as much information on the origins of said application. And so in this case, Germany, US, and Greece, right?
This stops a lot of users requesting things like coupon clippers, because it says, hey, do you want to request access to
Sure.
Coupert, which was made in China and will be able to see your passwords?
Yep.
Not all users. I wish everyone. This is why the administrator needs to be involved, but self-policing helps
It
those
does.
requests from coming in.
Yeah, and it reduces the amount of requests. I work with a lot of government agencies as well, and again, they have a regulatory requirement that they can't install foreign software. So this is one of the things that they tell them, right? If it says that it's not from the U.S., don't just send a request in, and you should really kind of stop and not send that in. But in this example, right, I said I want it, even though I don't know really what it is, as a person asking for it, so I'll send that request in, right? Once I send that request in, and of course we can have it hit your ticketing system, but
Like
will
ServiceNow or any
yeah,
kind of.
ServiceNow.
We've got various integrations with ticketing systems, so you can auto create a ticket and
Yep,
close a ticket as it gets approved.
yeah. But here it is coming in, right? And again, although it does say it's TeamViewer, it looks like TeamViewer, how do I know it really is? This is really kind of to me the best part about this whole thing, and it really is a time saver for those that are taking care of the administration of the applications. What ThreatLocker does and does really well is this: we take a hash of the file, right? And we compare it against our knowns, right? What does ThreatLocker know? Well, we know what this is when it matches something within our list. So in this case, right, I don't have to do much of anything else to verify that this is TeamViewer. We took a hash of the file, we compare it against our database, and it tells us, yep, Jerome, that is TeamViewer, by the way. And so therefore, if I wanted to approve it, it's very easy.
And then, of course, you can see the product information there as well. So you can see, was it made in China or Russia, or
Yep,
when you click the view product information on the bottom,
yep.
the show product information there, just on the right there.
Yep.
So you can see all of the information the user could see. You can also see potential risks. So there's a lot of risks with allowing remote access software, but needless to
Absolutely.
say, you in this case maybe you need to run it.
Right. But the best part, in my opinion, is the small number of clicks to make this happen, right? This is TeamViewer. Maybe the person that gave me a great justification as to why they needed it. Maybe there was a third-party application that needed to be, somebody needed to get remote into for the purpose of, servicing it or something like that. Then I can say that the person can TeamViewer into only this device, or perhaps, maybe everybody. But you know what? I don't want to do that. I just want to make sure it's only for that particular device.
And on best practice, you generally should approve computers, and you should especially your level 1 or level 2 help desk should probably only have permission to approve for a single computer,
I agree with that.
not because giving too much access to administrators can end up with global policies that have
Right.
no point. The other thing that's useful is obviously the policy expiration. So there's not many good reasons for TeamViewer to be installed on a business computer, but if you do use it in your environment, or maybe you need remote support for your payroll software, you could say you can run it for the next 12 hours, and then that policy automatically disappears.
Yep. That's a good point, right? If somebody was coming in for the purpose of services, like got to work on a server, right? Well, they're not going to work on it overnight, so I'll give them access for 8 hours only, so that they can do the work that they need to do. Um,
We won't get too much into the ring fencing because we're trying to focus purely on the allow listing, but
yeah.
sometimes we're left with a situation where we need to permit an app we don't particularly like. Maybe 7-Zip is a good example. People get
Hmm.
freaked out. It's made in Russia.
Yep.
No reason to believe it's bad. How do I stop it calling home? How do I stop it seeing my files? So you have the option to also ring fence it while permitting it, so it can't see your files. It can't go out to the internet except certain locations. But we won't get too much detail. But it's in same page, same
Yep.
Very easy. And the same applies with the elevation. We'll do a separate webinar on this, but you can also allow this program to run as a local admin. And this is where it gets interesting because people often think about allow listing to be slowing down IT. It actually speeds it up in many cases because let's just take a scenario right now. You're not using allow listing, you're not using ThreatLocker. Somebody's at home, they go and buy a new HP printer,
Hmm.
um, and they plug it in and they download the driver for it. And it says, if you're not using ThreatLocker, it says you need to enter your admin credentials to install this driver.
Sure.
If you are using ThreatLocker, it now says this executable isn't allowed to run.
Right.
Show me why, uh, justify why you need it. So the user says, okay, I'm a local admin. I need this because it's my home printer. So they hit send request. The IT guy gets the request. He can now see it's an HP printer. He can test it
Right.
in a testing environment, which we'll get to in a moment if he wants to.
Hmm.
He can approve it, but he can also allow it to elevate so he doesn't have to log on to the user's computers
Yeah.
to say this is a permitted application.
Yeah, it's quite convenient, right? And that's essentially what a lot of my partners do. Is of course when they do the approval, essentially most everybody from a security perspective should really not just have all sorts of administrative credentials into the box. So now the approver of said application has the opportunity then to say, let me give you elevation for maybe a couple of hours or so that you can install it yourself, right? You free up that resource from having to walk over to that person's desk or remoting into that person's computer and them saying like, well, sorry, don't kick me off. I'm in the middle of something, right? So we'll do the elevation and then we can, of course, send out the approval and then that's it, right? Just a couple of clicks and we're good to go. So where does that policy land, right? So we'll go to application control, take a look at policies. This will come into play here in a second, right? And I allowed it specifically for my machine and only my machine. So of course, TeamViewer with the elevation, and of course it's going to expire, and of course it's a temporary allowance for TeamViewer there.
So somebody's asked, this is a good point for question. So obviously you proved that, you saw it was less than a few seconds really, but 60
Right.
seconds, say, to get a pop-up to the user
Yep.
to say you can now run the software very, very quick. Somebody's asked the question, well, I don't have staff to manage the request. And I'll give two answers to this. So one of the things that makes this such a seamless process is ThreatLocker is the biggest user of our own product. We offer a service called Cyber Hero Approvals.
Yep.
And basically you can define what types of software you're allowed. If you just allowed updates to applications, what isn't allowed, you can basically create your own custom run book and you can send the request to our team. Now when you send the request to our team, they're going to run it in a testing environment, they're going to make sure it's not doing anything bad, they're going to check it's within your policy, and you can now and we will approve it for you, and we
Right.
pick up those requests. I think the average is like 2 minutes to pick them up. Sometimes it takes us 20 minutes to approve because we're doing lots of investigation.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes us 2 minutes because it's a built-in app. It's very, very easy
Right.
to approve. We do extreme amounts of investigation, but we've got over 1 million endpoints managed on that.
Yep.
And that kind of shows what we've put into making sure this process is simple, because if it wasn't simple, we would go out of business. So you can actually subscribe to that service. It's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. There's two types of companies in my mind that subscribe to it. One is very large companies that don't necessarily, or hospitals and things like that, that have 24-hour operations and don't necessarily want to train their staff on this. The other one is smaller companies that don't have 24-hour help desks but need to make sure that users don't get interrupted 24 hours a day. It's a relatively cheap service as well. Someone's asked, let me just cancel this. I thought I said an answer. There you go. Somebody also asked, there's a policy order thing. So the policies run in order, and you can essentially set a policy, say, I'm going to allow PowerShell. Maybe we can jump into that as well.
Hmm.
I'm going to allow PowerShell for Danny, but I'm not going to allow PowerShell for anyone else. So you'd put the Danny policy above that, and then you put the deny for everyone else. So have we got a PowerShell policy? Or
So I
anything?
have a PowerShell policy here, just letting PowerShell run. But at the same time, right, I can create multiple PowerShell policies. So let's go ahead and throw one in, they're basically the same one. So let's say it's PowerShell for Danny. There's an example. And then it's going to be the same definition, right? It's going to be the same application that we're basically trying to control there. In this case, it's the Windows PowerShell full language is what we're going to do. So it's identical to what we're using.
And the difference between those, if you only allow constrained language mode, it means you won't be able to run code in the PowerShell kernel. If you allow full language mode, it will basically tell PowerShell you can run in regular unrestricted mode. It's a nice solution. A lot of compliance requires that you restrict PowerShell to constrained language mode.
Yeah. So in this scenario, right, if we wanted to allow just Danny to do this, it really is the format is the domain. slash the username. So in this case, let's say the username is Danny. All right. So then we could say that only Danny can obviously use Windows PowerShell in this scenario, right? We can turn on the ring fencing and all those pieces, but just for the sake of this demonstration here, this is how we can make sure that username
Now,
Danny
we could also do
on any.
a schedule policy on this. So you could say that Danny
Sure,
only works 2 hours a day because he's super lazy.
absolutely.
He can only run this from 9 till 11 a.m.,
Yep.
which is a nice feature as well.
Yep. So then once we turn this on, so then that's now created, and of course the policy order will force it to put it up at the top, and of course it's set at a schedule there. Now we already have an existing PowerShell policy that is turned on here. So maybe what I am trying to accomplish is to let Danny run PowerShell and nobody else. So then I'll turn around and modify this policy and basically say nobody else can run it. Now, I don't have to actually do that. What I can simply do is just delete the policy or turn the policy off altogether.
Because then, well, with PowerShell, it hit the core. So not
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
So, and it's probably worth mentioning that. So we have a Windows core policy which includes all of the Windows updates, and then you'd have PowerShell, which is a carved out component from core.
right.
Because you could carve out Windows policies above the core policy. So in this case, you'd want to explicitly deny it because it would be part of Windows if you
Yep.
didn't deny it. The question someone asked was, and I like to answer the hard questions as well. Now, when we go through these policies, we go in order and we check which app. So essentially, an execution happens and it says, is this file match this application? If there's a permit policy for this application, yes.
Yeah.
But we have some carved out exceptions for that. And what that means is there's two areas. So let's just say, for example, 5 years ago, you had a policy to block Dropbox. And then you had a policy underneath that to allow Microsoft Office. Well, Dropbox contains a number of DLLs that are used by Microsoft Office.
Right.
So when you had that, you'd open this DLL, WinWord would open this DLL, and it would say DLL hash 1234 ABC. And it would say, this is in Dropbox and this is in Office. But the Dropbox policy says block first. Therefore, I'm now going to block Dropbox
Right.
from running.
Right.
And then Office would stop functioning. So we made some changes, say 2 years ago,
Yeah.
that we use a lot more intelligence to determine what is the actual application. And what that means is if the DLL comes from Office at a simple level, if the DLL was opened by Office and it belongs to Office and it belongs to Dropbox, we're going to say, even though the Dropbox policy is ahead, it's a dependency of Office, therefore we should run it. Now, when we
Right.
did that, what we didn't realize is some people had some custom versions of our built-in application. So you'd say, I have my own custom definition of PowerShell, which I've created by hash, and I'm trying to create a policy on that, and that's overriding your built-in definition. And the problem is we're changing that so you can actually create your own custom definitions. And someone asked for an ETA, which was the question. It's a little bit more complicated because in order to do that, it will actually potentially stop PowerShell ring fencing working because we've got PowerShell policies running at the group level, which go before the computer level. So we're actually having to reorder all of the policies so you can define them in order. We did actually complete it, but there was a bunch of failures, so we have to go back in QA. So it is on the pretty close roadmap. My guess is it's not days or weeks, it's probably months. There's a lot of testing involved because we have to reorder policies. It's also a pretty fringe case. And where companies have had problems because we prioritize the built-in over non-built-in, where we've actually created exceptions, we've added a built-in explicitly for their need. But we're hoping within Q2 or beginning of Q3, it should get a resolution.
So then we're going to be able to use the order, right, in the
You'll be able to
different yeah.
You'll be able to essentially, because right now the policies run organization policies, well,
Right.
global policies, which are set. If you've got sub-organizations, you could set them there. They run first, and then organization policies, then computer policies, then group policies.
Yep.
And the default deny, of course, is at
In
the
group
bottom of
level.
the group. So it runs in that order. The new system will allow you to set a group policy to run above a computer policy or a
Very nice. Yeah.
but also be able to allow you to have membership in multiple groups. So they're the changes we're making. It seems like a small change. It's actually incredibly complex and requires every area of the code to be touched, which is why it's taken so long for those who asking the questions. So you've permitted TeamViewer. Obviously, TeamViewer is allowed to run. I don't know if you want to show that just in case someone didn't believe.
Yeah, so let me bring in that application again and try to execute it. And of course, the policy is already in place. So therefore, if I try to execute it, it's taking a little bit here. But of course, as you can see here, it's now allowing me to execute it without it getting blocked.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions I want to answer before we move on. Would this work with Azure Virtual Desktops? Absolutely. How does it work when updating your session hosts and blowing up your old hosts in the host pool? Also, what would you see in the console? and this is specific to VDIs. So,
Mhm.
and it depends how you configure your VDIs, whether it's Azure or anyone else. And there's different recommendations. If you have a golden image VDI that reverts to its original state every single day, the way we recommend you configure this, and there's a whole knowledge base, so I won't go too
Yeah.
close, is you have essentially one computer showing in our portal. It will log each instance separately in the unified
Yeah.
audit, so you'll be able to see the logs individually, but it registers as one computer in the portal. It'll also count a license for each individual. If these are persistent
Right.
VDIs, where the user essentially creates from a golden image, then that's a different recommendation where you essentially have an empty, it deploys, it locks down, and then they can have their own policies and it stays persistent. There is a whole KB on that. It works very well with Citrix environments. It works very well with remote desktops and VDIs. But if you are using VDIs, make sure you speak to your solution engineer and you talk about the
Yeah, there's
requirements.
3 very specific scenarios that we'll run you through, and yeah, and it's really straightforward to be honest. And as Danny said, it works for Citrix as well. So we use the same KB to get that
So
working.
somebody asked, is there a way to copy a policy? We have a copy policy. I mean, you can publish
We
it.
do, we do.
Yeah. So I haven't actually seen that.
Yeah, no, actually, it's quite easy. So let's create a scenario here, right? So I have a group called servers here as well, and let's say for the sake of argument, I wanted to copy all of my workstation policies over to the servers group. So I'm going to go over to the workstation group here. So while I am here, I'm going to hit this policy management. I'm going to hit copy existing policies. And then from here, I could pick and choose which ones do I want to copy, right? So maybe these 4 right here, and then hit this drop down. So I don't have to just allow just the one group. I can take it all the way down to individual machines as well and say copy it over to here. Again, assuming you need all of this stuff. But that being the case, you don't have to copy the policies over and over again. You can do it all in one shot, select the ones that you need, and once that's done, it'll just copy it over, right? So then once one I selects that, hit copy there, and then now it's copied it over, and those same exact policies will now appear on the server side here.
Okay, somebody's asked about approving from an app. Is there a reason an admin could not log into the TL app as a quick way to check requests after? Absolutely. There's a mobile
Yeah.
app. You can get push notifications. You can approve directly from the mobile phone, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think about the only thing that you can't do on the mobile app is to run a VDI out of it. So basically, every single function that you can do pretty much in the ThreatLocker portal pertaining to approvals and things like that, 100% available in the
I
app.
think we answered the prioritization, which command line gets updates. How do we block CMD but let Edge download updates via command? Okay, so what about Edge, which is using command line to get updates? How do we block CMD but let Edge download commands via CMD? So I think this is referring to ring fencing. I won't go too deep into ring
Right.
fencing today, but essentially, if the default ring fencing policy that we have stops Edge calling out to command prompt.
Correct.
I think there is for Chrome. I'm not sure about Edge, but for Chrome, which is Edge's Chromonian base, there's a
Mhm.
Chrome updates and a Chrome installer and a Chrome policy. So we have a Chrome installer that allows the Chrome installer to call command prompt, but the Chrome browser not to. So I'm assuming the same for Edge, is it?
It is the same.
Yeah, I haven't actually looked at the
absolutely.
Edge policy in a while.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes there's some really bad Chrome extensions that like to call out to command prompt, so the ring fencing policy will stop them working. But and you can just remove it if it's causing it. The goal here isn't to stop everything from working. The goal here is to do the least amount you need for your business.
Yeah, and I think Danny makes a good point here, because I have this conversation quite often, where we have set it up, everything is working great, right? But we have default policies, right? And then of course this goes into the ring fencing, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But out of the box here, I have Chrome, and it's not allowed to laterally move to RegServe, CScript, and all of these particular applications. But you might have a third party application that is very custom for your organization, and it needs to laterally move over to command prompt. Well, the easiest thing to do is basically allow it to happen by getting rid of this. Now, if it's isolated to a machine or two, or maybe a group of machines or a specific function of machines, you want to put those machines into their own group and then remove that functionality, so that that blocking of command prompt, so that those applications on that machine can continue to laterally move and everybody else still will have be met with that restriction,
I
because you
want
don't
to
need.
show a couple of other features because I know we're tight
Yeah,
on
yeah.
time. So one is, and that you don't need ThreatLocker patch management for this. When you deploy ThreatLocker, it's obviously showing you here all of your applications. Do you have on your health report? Do you have any unpatched applications, or are you just too well behaved for that?
I don't think I have any unpatched
Maybe we can just pull
applications.
up the health report and show where they'd
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
So if you're using, as soon as you deploy ThreatLocker, so my chat window's in the way. On the right side there, scroll up. Oh, missing updates. So you
Yeah.
scroll down.
Missing
So
updates.
you have 0 applications with missing updates, but
Yep.
this will also show you, and you can click on it and you can see, even without the patch management, which applications are out of date. If you want to patch them, we have a patch management system. That's a separate system, but it's useful to know that you're running out-of-date software in your
Yep.
environment. That's really nice thing to show. The other thing I'd like to show is, obviously, we've deployed here, we've locked down, we've secured. It was pretty easy. And by the way, I was going to do the demo myself, and to put it in perspective, I installed my machine, and you'd set up, and I had to switch to Zoom to answer the questions. But I'd installed my machine at 10 a.m. this morning. I had about 15 different apps installed, and it learned and was ready to demo
Yes.
by 10:45 completely. So it's now, I'm not recommending people don't do more than 45 minutes learning, but
Yep.
this is not a heavy lift people think it is. I've deployed companies with 50,000 endpoints,
Right.
and they thought it was going to be a nightmare, and it's a part-time job for 1 or 2
Right.
techs who just maintaining this. Um, One of the things the other thing it's worth showing is the testing environment, because look,
Yeah.
sometimes we're going to get an update. Do you have the Google update or the
Uh,
business
uh,
test app?
I don't have the Google Test app, but I'll go back and run the same the same one that I approved, right? So I'm gonna go to my approved one right here and kind of pick up this TeamViewer one as an example. So let's just pretend for the sake of argument, right? We don't have a built-in. So if I take a look at this, I don't have any of that built-in stuff there. So what I can actually do is, instead of approving it by way of the built-in, I
And
can.
actually, ThreatLocker, if ThreatLocker didn't know what this was, ThreatLocker would say you should run this in our testing environment
Correct.
first.
Absolutely.
We're gonna give you a big start warning that
Right.
bad stuff can happen here. Run this in the testing environment before you go and approve it.
Yep.
And this serves 2 purposes. One is to obviously say if this is good or bad, and we don't like to use word good or bad, but what it's doing, potential risks.
Correct. Now, the nice thing about it is that it's already built in with what's called the risk center. The risk center will give you visibility to basically all of these individual components. But before I do that, let me kind of scroll down a little bit and get this application running. So I'll hit run now here and essentially allow this particular application to execute. Let me do a couple of clicks here, accept, and just let that happen.
So this is essentially a VDI in the cloud, not attached to your network, allows you to explode the program,
Yep.
see if it's doing something bad, see if it's ransomware, and before you approve it. But it also captures all of the new files. So
Correct.
if there was 200 dependencies, you wouldn't have to go and get requests for every single permit. And one of the features, I don't know if we've added it yet. If we haven't added it, it's being added very imminently. It may have already been done. Was the ability to require your level 1 and level 2s to run any unbuilt-in applications through the testing environment.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Is that permission there yet?
I have not seen that yet.
Yeah.
No.
So if it's not there, it's going to be imminently there, because we don't want people approving things that haven't been tested. So you can set as a company admin that your lower admins who maybe don't have the same training, you've got to run it through the testing environment to approve it, and it will catalog all of the dependencies for you.
Gotcha. Yeah, so what we're showing here, right, is I did allow the application to install, and of course it's in the process of installing. But at the same time, right, it extracted all of these particular DLLs, executions, right, and landed them in their appropriate folder. But at the same time, right, it's giving me all of the hashes that are associated with this particular application. That being the case, it makes it that much easier for me. Let me get this thing to kind of scroll over, right? That much easier to catalog every single part, piece, whatever of this particular application, right?
This
So
screen isn't that big. The reason this is scrolling is because for our webinars we record everything at like a really low
yeah,
resolution. So if people have got small screens, they can see it. This will, I think it's like 900 by 1200. This app, so it's not
yeah,
going to be scrolling like this in the reality.
yep. So that being the case, what did I click on there? Get back into that, right? So then I'll be able to, not only see everything, but at the same time, it compares every single file against virus total. And it'll tell me, right, does virus total know something about this particularly hashed file? In this case, this desktop exe, right? Apex, not a well-known, so you got to kind of take the information with a grain of salt. But if had
Let's
it,
face it, it says everything's malware.
yeah, pretty
So
much, right? The other thing too that it's not just about whether or not it's known malware, right? Canary files. So on this particular system, this particular VDI, if I headed over to my documents and I headed over to the
we got some test data.
test data inside it. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
we got some test
absolutely.
data with
Yep,
credit cards and
yep,
in documents and things
yep,
like that. So
yep. So if I head over to here, and basically trip the credit card data here, right? It'll log that behavior, right? Going yellow, letting me know that somebody's accessing it. And when I hit save, also log the change there where somebody actually made the saving of that data.
So there's a custom test piece of malware that I wrote a few years ago
Hmm.
that's in VirusTotal, pretty clean apart from Apex and Max Secure,
Right.
and it encrypts the files on the machine. And we've been running that for 2 years in these environments, and it hasn't been
Oh,
tripped
it still has not. Absolutely.
by any of the EDRs or major players. And this, of course, it's blocked. This environment shows that it's doing something bad. Of course, if this is good when you end, you can just hit end and capture. If you find it to be bad, you can hit discard.
Yep.
There's two other things I want to show because we're trying to dive a bit deeper into this. One is the installation mode,
Hmm.
uh, and we can probably just discard this one. The
Yeah.
other one is now. Installation mode is really important. So let's say we want to install this file, and let's just say, for argument's sake, this is an SAP upgrade on a server. We're not going to be able to run that in a testing environment and catalog the 6,000 dependencies because we're upgrading an existing server. So we also have the option, rather than using the testing environment, if we've got an admin doing the installation under control, we can put the machine into an installation mode for an hour or a period of time, and we can allow the files to be cataloged automatically. So what this
Yep.
will do is it will temporarily turn off blocking off a server. It will catalog all the files and learn them into that app. So in this case, we could say turn off blocking. There's this new option if you've been with ThreatLocker a while to start installation mode upon file execution. So this is when, rather than starting it immediately, the user will get a pop-up saying this file's now being permitted. When they run the file, installation mode will start. So if they are away from their desk for 2 hours, they don't have to come back and say,
That is a
oh,
great feature right there. Yeah, absolutely.
so that's a really nice feature. We also have learning mode. We typically don't recommend using that. Where monitor, because that's going to be far more inclusive. It's going to learn anything, even if it was previously denied on the machine. It's going to
Correct.
turn off blocking. It's going to say, I'm going to learn anything that's happening. It's useful. I always call it UPS mode. So it's when you installed a program without using installation mode or without using the testing environment. There's 200 DLLs put into the folder, and the executable is allowed to run, but all the DLLs aren't. So what we're going to do now is we use learning mode to learn what would have learned
Right.
that's already on the machine. And the third option is monitor mode.
Yep.
And you can turn these on from your app as well. And this is where, hey, I'm on the server. I just need to run an IP scan or something like that. I don't want to allow this software going forward. So I'll just put it in monitor mode for an hour. Let me do what I want to do. And then it will forget everything I've done.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Every time I show this to folks, right, it's always about installation rule. You want to do targeted learning for the specific application that you're trying to run because I'm approving putting the machine into an install. Everything that happens as part of that install, I want it to get captured in the specific application that I've specified. So in this case, like a team viewer or something like that.
Okay, someone's asked, can we control extensions allowed in Chrome and Edge?
Oh yeah,
Absolutely, and it's really smooth. And if you're using web control, this has got nothing to do with the extensions. It will also obviously control what websites you go to, so that's a really cool feature. Okay, someone's asked, prompted how great the unified audit is. That was a pretty big dev change,
yeah.
and
Oh,
it was also a really, really expensive server change because we had to double all of our servers during the transition period. So we have petabytes of data.
yeah, and so far so good. I mean, it is. I can do a search for basically everything that happened in the week, and it spits it back to me in a couple of seconds. So
Yeah, the new unified audit is fantastic, and there's a report. All that we will be able to do all the reports again. They've fixed the issue. Obviously, we had to rewrite the entire way we store data from the ground up, but very excited. So much faster. It was not a cheap project. I think our storage costs were millions alone to migrate to it, but it's a great thing. Someone's asked about SaaS applications. We have, and somebody's also asked about Office 365. What does it do? We have Office 365 control and detect. We can't get too much into that because we've literally got 7 minutes left. We have done some webinars and we'll be doing more webinars
right.
on those features. But if you are an existing customer, it's definitely worth looking at. Can you talk about the recent change to installation mode? So this was by a lot of requests. I'll talk about this quickly.
Yeah.
The way learning mode, monitor mode works and installation mode used to work was it was temporarily disable all protection on the machine.
Yep.
For an hour, catalog the changes depending on whether you're learning, installation, or monitor, and it would permit those files going forward. Sometimes you need to use installation mode for a user. So a user needs to run a QuickBooks. QuickBooks is a built-in app, so it's probably a bad example, but we'll say SAP or something that we don't
Sure.
have a built-in app. And they request it. We can't run it in the testing environment. Typically, you want to have custom rules exceptions, but say you can't, you want to run installation mode. The problem people had is they said, well, I ran installation mode. The users got smart and realized if I download a game at the same time, I can run that installation mode
Yep.
in the background, and it will learn into the finance or app update. So what we did is we made a change. So essentially, we put some restrictions in place. So it's not fully open. It allows. First of all, we tried to make a change to just spin off dependencies and track the dependencies of the installer. What we realize though is too many installers call things like PowerShell, which now loses its tracking. So what we did is we just put a change in place to say installation mode will allow you to run any software that's already permitted, or any software for new installed files. So what that means is you can't download something from a browser and run it if it's not already permitted. But
Right.
if the program goes and creates it, it will add it to the list and it's going to allow it. So it's much more efficient. It gives the user a more secure experience. It allows administrators. We don't recommend installation mode being used unattended because it's not bulletproof. You could still open Word and go to browse and
Yep.
figure ways around it, but it means that you're not worried about watching your user. Did they download a game at the same time? So you can't run any other programs unless they're permitted, but then your installer will be able to create programs and they'll all be learned and they'll be able to run as well. It was an important change asked by a lot of people that we give more restrictions around installation mode.
And I also tell my customers that if you allow something by way of installation mode, go back into the application and take a look at what's there. If you're only expecting, 20, 30, 40 files in there, and then you open it up and there's thousands, and clearly the end user figured out, oh, I can install all sorts of other stuff.
Someone's asked the same question about learning
Yeah.
mode. Same principle applies. So
Yeah.
someone said, what if I put learning mode on a terminal server multi-user environment and it learns the wrong application? So first of all, on a terminal server, you can specify just a user account for learning mode or installation mode. So when you go into the settings, you can say only this user. So if someone else is doing something, it won't learn, and it won't actually allow other users to unblock. However, talking about best practices, learning mode should be used for your initial onboarding. It really shouldn't be used after the fact. I'm not saying never. It obviously has a function, but in 90% of cases, learning mode after the fact is not necessary. Use the testing environment, permit by custom rule, or permit manually. It is really an ups mode that I installed something.
Mhm.
And like I said, you deploy ThreatLocker, you do a simulation for a month, and no apps are updating in that month, and everything looks clean. And then the day afterwards, Thomson Reuters downloads 50 different files.
Right.
That's a reason to use learning mode to get the user back up and running, but it's the exception, at which point you'd create a custom rule going forward. So that's important. And we're not going to get through all of these. How do you configure a default policy for a single machine? I mean, you can just create new policy, say all applications. It's absolutely fine to do that.
Yep.
So target install mode. What's the purpose of removing install mode? So someone asked why we remove store mode from the computers page as opposed to the approval request, and you can do it from the unified audit still. And the reason being is because you can't actually start the install anymore. So it's pointless being from the computers page, whereas before it was temporarily disable all protection. So you can start learning mode, you can start monitor mode from the computers page, but if the initial install file isn't there, you won't be able to run it because it's not on the whitelist. So in order to permit start install mode now, you can do it from an approval request, or you can go to the unified audit, see your initial file, hit permit, and start it straight from there. That's why we removed it from the computers page on the build 216. Someone's asked about best practices for scripts from like RMM or software deployment solutions. I think, and you should work with your solution engineer because every one of these is different.
Yeah. Well, my best practice is this: when you should create that policy that says, obviously, we know the behavior, right? Puts it in a temporary directory, and we know it's some ephemeral string .ps1 or something like that. That's fine, but I'm not going to leave that policy on 24/7. I might schedule it if the person pushing out the policy or the
most
change.
RMMs, not all.
Yeah.
So, and there are some temporary files to exclusions.
Yep.
Each script has a unique hash, and that hash doesn't change.
Exactly.
And there are exceptions. I think N-Central has some weird behavior where it creates some batch files.
Yep.
And you can limit what they can do. But the best practice is very simple. Only allow the script by hash if you can, and if you can't, limit it. And the people who followed that practice in 2021 had a really, really easy 4th of July weekend.
Yep.
And people who didn't follow that practice had a much tougher 4th of July. The RMM is the nuclear weapon that will take down your business. It takes 5 minutes to approve a script. If you want to schedule, of course, we've just focused on Allowlisting today. This is probably the deepest Allowlisting demo we've done. But if you want to see a demo of all the products and you haven't done, or if you're an existing customer and you want to see a demo of the new products, you either click on the demo link, which should be in the chat, or just reach out to your solution engineer or your account manager, and they will help you with a demo of the new products. There's a bunch of cool stuff coming. We got a new product coming out in the next few weeks as well. Well, a new feature no charge feature coming out in the next few weeks as well. And Jerome's looking at
I'm
me.
like, I don't know what it is, so
Um,
don't schedule a call with me and ask me what it
so
is.
that's going to be an interesting find as well, which will hopefully solve a bunch more security problems. We thank everyone for their time today. If you haven't checked out the other things, like I said, book a demo with ThreatLocker, reach out to your account manager, and we've got the Zero Trust World links as well. Thank you, Jerome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.